Yeah, well, no.
Yeah.
I have a partner right,
Like, that was a
he's pretty good about it, but I can only do so good on the prices.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Good evening. This is the meeting of the Finance Committee on Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. I will start by apologizing. This is not 7 o'clock, this is not 7:30, and this is not the John Bauer Senior Center. Later today, we made a decision to move to this room, which we originally thought was not available, and thanks to police and fire, we're here this evening at a 7:40 start at the Public Safety Building. We are a committee of 7. We have 6 members in attendance. 4 is a quorum. We determined that we have a quorum and the meeting is officially open. There are a number of people we can see in the audience from the public this evening, and would just mention to you, we'd like anybody and everybody who would wish to speak. We do have some business to conduct, so if you could allow us to control the nature of the speaking, and when you do speak, if you could be certain to grab a microphone so that not only we can hear you in this room, but anybody viewing can hear you as well. But you're welcome to comment. On our agenda this evening, the second item is a review of a certain transfer request that has been submitted to us. The board has been, the committee has been given copies of it. It's reflected for you on the screen as well, and it's a transfer of $2,340 from the Wachusett Regional School District Assessment, which currently has a balance of $10,122.65, to the legal account, which has no balance, and the description is for some ongoing legal expenditures that the town is incurring. We've voted to approve, this could be our second or third one so far this year, with the idea that there may be a one or two to follow this evening. So is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? None. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. The motion carries. So now the second piece, which has 4 bullets, which may very well be slightly commingled. We're hoping to get through essentially a budget with an override, proposed override, and then speak to the point of a budget whereby it does not include an override. So I thought I would start, and I'm maybe going to engage the services and the help of Heather and Jeremy. But you might recall we had an earlier slide that we shared with the group back at our June 5th meeting. And it's not an official document. It was designed to be informational. It could very well be a good launching point for tonight's discussion. But at the top of the page, we were basically quantifying for those that may not be fully in the know that we have essentially 47 different cost centers. 45 are town-related, and then we have one for Wachusett Regional School District and one for Bay Path Regional. And in some of the budget data that we have essentially been shared, with or without the override, there are 26 of those particular 47 cost centers where there's no change from the with override to the without override. There's another cluster grouping that there are 12 others 3 that have changes to the amount of $500 to $700, for what it may matter. One of them's $100, one of them's $200, and one of them's $400. 8 cost centers that have changes between $500 and $2,500. No small matter to those small departments, but nevertheless, informationally sharing that point with you here. 1 cost center is being cut by $3,600, so you have 12 cost centers in this cluster that would be reduced with the override not passing by $15,939. Again, a big deal for those particular departments, but those of us on the Finance Committee have dug deeper and cut deeper in prior years, so in one respect, it's a big amount to them, in another respect, in the scheme of our multi-million-dollar budget, not that big. So if you were to look at that, that's 38 out of 47 cost centers that have a change of only $15,000. A majority of them, obviously, you can do the math in terms of what percentage it is. So the next to the last and the second to the next to the last cost centers, it really comes down to 8 cost centers. And we've kind of clustered them here, no disrespect to those that are grouped in the 5 of them, but kind of a secondary class in terms of the impact to them. And you can see in a couple of instances, it's quite substantial. And don't mean to overuse the phrase and don't mean to use it disrespectfully, but the 3 800-pound gorillas, if you could scroll down just a little more, Jeremy, are police, fire, and DPW, which make up $799,301 of the cuts that we need to deliberate this evening. So that's kind of the backdrop. And from all of that, with speaking to those 8 cost centers, which I'm going to engage Heather to help us walk through her very useful narrative that she gave to us, we're going to also change course at some point to speak to some warrant articles, of which there are 5. And it would be easy to say that we would just do all 5 together, but I think what I would like to suggest is that we do 1, then we do 2, 3, and 4, and then we spend the remainder of the evening with the 5th one, which speaks to those 8 cost centers and the budget cuts that would ensue if an override did not pass. Does that make sense? So, Jeremy, with his deft IT ability here, if we could go to the warrant articles, of which there are 5. In Article 1, speaks to the point of rescinding an Article 17 that was voted on and approved at the annual town meeting, keeping in mind that what's facing us Thursday, the 27th, is a special town meeting. This one was the article that was passed for the $1,440,000, which was defeated at the ballot. So the legal counsel conventional wisdom, with an assist, I think, from Heather, was to rescind that particular article. So I'm looking, keeping in mind that what we can do here is to recommend approval, recommend disapproval, recommend take no action, and then vote yay, nay, or abstain. So looking to, don't want to minimize it, but looking to dispense of Article 1 if there's a motion to be made.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? None. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Article 1 passes as approved. You'll note that on the language there, it speaks to the point that the Finance Committee will make recommendation at town meeting. I think that can mean to imply on or before town meeting, but the warrant articles were closed last Monday. We didn't have the benefit of meeting last Monday. We're meeting this evening. This had to go to print, so we didn't want to go on record as approving or disapproving when we didn't vote on them. So there's a customary language that was used, and now we've approved it. So now the question is, testing Jeremy's skills here, is the one-page budget sheet that Heather sent out to us that included town only. And committee members were, in various emails, was sent this previously. So for the lack of a better reference, that must be aging, because I thought it was green and red. It looks like it's green and brown at this particular
This is
point.
the one I had last, on the 5th.
Yeah.
Is it changed?
No,
No, it should be, you're good.
that's it,
That one doesn't have the school. It's not-
Okay.
right.
You're good.
So there was some question as to whether or not we voted for the green column, and I would go on record, and I think the minutes will reflect that we did. And by extension of voting of that, it was implied that we included all the 45 departments that are listed there. So the question is, do we want to have June 5th's vote stand? Do we want to ratify the June 5th vote? Or do we want to take an additional vote to approve that, which we were on record on June 5th of having done so?
I would think that our vote would be this, if nothing's changed.
Yep,
We have voted to approve the budget, I believe exactly how it's written on Article 2, at 822,4,716, which is that the same number?
yep.
Yeah, unless something's changed, I don't see a point.
Yeah, unless something's changed, we approved that on June 5th.
So is there interest in ratifying it, or are we going to live with our vote on June 5th? Which I'm happy to do. I'm just trying to put an official exclamation point on it.
I mean, I'm fine with just sticking with the June
Okay?
5th vote.
So if you note, this one includes, if you work from the bottom, three lines from the bottom, there's $114,500, which is $57,250 going to general stabilization, and the same amount going to capital stabilization. So that essentially would bring us back to Articles 2, 3, and 4. And if we could go back there, happy to take a vote on Articles 2, 3, and 4, obviously one at a time. And Article 2, I don't know if there's official need for me to read it, or if I could just ask for a motion as it reads, both on the printed warrant articles that you have and what appears on the screen above.
Make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Article 2 passes as approved. Article 3 is to put $57,250 into the general or operating stabilization fund, as reads on your printout and as reads on the screen. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. This is only contingent if we approve the override, but
Correct.
it's not worded that way.
So I think there's a little bit, Mark and I have gone back and forth on this. So the legal language is correct in the warrant. The language that was on the prior sheet is, I think, Mark's interpretation of the language. So when you're looking at the reduced services versus the level services budget, right? The level services being what we're actually asking for. That one is contingent upon the successful passage of an override. That is language we take from the master law. That is language that you see in Article 2. Article 5, which is the reduced services budget, means it doesn't matter what happens with the override. If the override does not pass, this is the budget we're going with. So in Mark's prior documentation, the language is backwards.
No, I'm talking about Article 3. It is,
Oh, Article 3. So Article 3, so here's what happens, right? Because, sorry, there's a lot of moving parts here. So what ends up happening is the notion was to reduce the reliance on free cash to the tune of $114,000.
hold on, I understand that. The key is we don't have that money if the override doesn't pass.
Correct. So like in the presentation last night, it was clear, it'll be clear in the info sheet, the intent is to pass over Articles 2, 3, and 4 in the event the override is unsuccessful.
Okay.
So the reason it's not contingent is because we cannot fund the capital stabilization, cannot fund the operating stabilization directly as a result of the ballot question. It has to be a separate element, or we have to do things very differently.
Right, no, I understand.
Okay.
It's
I
just.
just
you
want to
read-
correct what you said real quick. You said 2, 3, and 4. If Article 2 doesn't pass, you will skip over 3 and 4. Because 2 is the over.
If the vote doesn't, if the
Right.
vote on Monday does not pass, 2,
For-
3,
for-
and 4 get skipped, and we just deal with 1 and 5.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
So the first article regardless, and then we either do we'll call it a package of
Okay.
2, 3, and 4, or just number 5.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Article 3 passes. Article 4, same amount, $57,250, which together equals the $114,500 that we saw on the previous slide, would be, a free cash would be transferred to the Capital Stabilization Fund, also known as the Capital Depreciation Fund. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have to make a motion to approve, right?
This is a motion to approve,
Approve as written.
and a second was made.
So,
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Motion to approve carries. So now we're down to Article 5, in the event that the override does not pass. So Heather, you've given us some good information, not the least of which is a very useful narrative. And we also asked for the 8, not trying to talk about CPA firms or football conferences, but the big 8. And we all have all the detail, line by line, of those, each of those 8. But I thought if we could start with your narrative, which was sent to us, it's dated June 18th, but it was sent to us on Friday. Can we refer to that and have you speak to them in the, partially in the order that you have here? I might jump over police, fire, and DPW and then circle back to those. But if we could start with recreation and library, that would be great.
I have the one from the 5th.
So, Jeremy, if you actually go to I threw them on the website earlier today, and it's all in one big document. It might be
Gotcha.
easier.
Yep.
So I'll just give you a second, because
Sure.
if you can go through the spreadsheets as I talk, it might help people with a point of reference.
Where are they in the?
FY '25 budget, Yep, Finance Committee materials and video, and the complete packet. Yep. And starts with the memo, so if you scroll down to like page 4, it'll put us on rec.
There you go. What do you want, page 4?
Yep, right there. Excellent, thank you. All right, so recreation. So what we have here is, when I worked on these last week, I actually revised them. I try to make them as clean as possible, so you're just looking at comparison of the Article 2, which is the level service version, versus the Article 5 reduced services for each of these budgets. And I did not use the word contingent in any of these because I didn't want to confuse everyone even further. So we'll just say Article 2, level services budget, the one that only is in play if the override is successful on Monday, and Article 5, which is the proposed reduced services budget, which would come into play if we were not successful at the override on Monday. So the difference here for recreation is $32,707, so it's the entire budget. So in the FY25 level services budget, what you're getting for the recreation department is the recreation director. Right now, what happens is the town, through the operating budget, covers 67% of the recreation director's salary, and you don't see it here because it's in employee benefits in another section. We also cover 67% of her benefits, so health insurance, retirements, Medicare, all those pieces and percentages are covered. The revolving fund, which is user fee based, covers the other 33%. What ends up happening from Article 2 to Article 5 is that there's a burden shift, right? Instead of splitting the cost of that position 6733, we move the position to 100% to be covered by the revolving fund. That means that the user fees for that program and anything that's left in the balances would have to cover the cost of that. Based on calculations and conversations with Jeff, who's the chair of the Recreation Commission, it was determined that that would likely strain that account enough that they would only be able to sustain with that position for another 4 to 5 years before they were out of funds. That also means that in the FY25 reduced services proposal, that there would be a reduction of what they're able to cover so that they can focus their costs instead on making sure that they're covering the recreation director's salary. So that would reduce all of the free programs that we currently have now, the Easter egg hunt, summer concert series, holiday tree lighting, and others. And it also would put them in a tighter position when they have to do repairs and maintenance to the various grounds and facilities that they currently operate. So that is the difference of those two budgets. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest that we have discussion before motion and second. So is there anybody that would like to engage in any discussion? And Jeff, you're welcome to make any comments before discussion or following our own, or however you'd like to participate.
I think Heather just said enough. I appreciate what you said.
Yeah. So I'll offer a couple of things. I think, first of all, that this, popular or unpopular, this has been raised at least, as I recall, 2 budget sessions, this year and last year. I'm not sure it was raised the year before. Heather, you make a point that moving it to the revolving account, revolving fund, is going to be tight. But the reason it's being considered to be moved to the revolving fund is the town's budget is tight. And again, for it or against it, I want to underscore the fact this is not displacing a person from employment. It's just shifting where the salary is being paid for. And currently that, by some standards, that revolving account currently has $266,000, which you can burn through cash pretty quickly, but on the other hand, that's a pretty healthy balance. I don't know, I don't have all the statistics, but I can say that other towns do have the director's salary fully funded out of revolving funds. So this is not extraordinary, and I want to underscore again, we're not displacing anybody from their job. So there's reasons to not like it, there's reasons to like it, and there's reasons to be okay with it. But in tough times, we need to make tough decisions, and this could very well be one of them. So the question then becomes, at some point, shall we vote on these 8 in terms of what has been proposed by you? And I think it's important to note, as you noted a minute ago, in consultation with the Recreation Commission and the chairman, so you didn't do it in a vacuum. We're not doing it in a vacuum. This was their stepping forward and helping with the $835,000 deficit that we have.
So I'd also add, so in this case, we're not looking at the level services budget and reducing it down to 0. We're saying, if the override is funded, we keep things the same way they are this year. What we're saying is that in the event we don't have the override funds, we've looked at everything, as we've talked about a number of times, including essential services. We love the rec programs. They do an amazing job. But unfortunately, it's not an essential service when we're saying we have $835,000 to reduce. We have to see if we can find another way to fund it. That's why it would shift over, in this case, the revolving fund. And the recommendation is to move it to 0 for FY25, to shift to the revolving fund if we do not have a successful override passing, because we don't have those additional funds to be able to currently continue paying for it.
So in your narrative, Heather, you were speaking of worst possible case. This is going to add more and more stress 4 and 5 years out. Jeff, I think in your email that you circulated, you said 6 or 7 years out. So part of me says 6 or 7 years is plenty of time to correct course and make changes and prevent that dire possible outcome from occurring.
Yeah, get a mic.
Yep. Do you have a mic?
No, not back here. So right now, the reason that the revolving fund is so high is because of summer camp. We've taken in most of the receipts on that already, and so that's why our budget has so much fluctuation in it, is because of where the fiscal year sits in the middle of summer camp. So we always go in high, but then by the time we come in finish with summer camp, it's much lower than that. So realistically, we can probably assume about let's call it the 240 we talked about last night. And if you extrapolate, if everything stays the same, taking assuming that the $13,000 that we pull in increased fees every year, if you assume that off of Kathy's base salary along with health care, you're looking at about $27,000. If you take that against the $240,000, that's 8.5 years. But the problem is that we have so many moving targets and unplanned expenses. Like we can easily plan on the the general maintenance that we have to do on the playground. But the problem is larger fees, larger costs that we will likely incur in the future, where we have the Klingler and the Tiverton irrigation systems, which are pretty much toast right now. Sprinkler heads have to be replaced. There's lines that are leaking. We just had to replace the pump at Klingler. The Wentworth restroom is a complete disrepair. If we're ever going to use that again, we're going to have to revamp it. We just replaced the roof. That building operates off a cesspool, which obviously is not that reliable. So that was, if that ever goes, that's going to be another fee. So it's just the problem of, yes, there's, if you hardline it, 8.5 years left in the recreation, but there's so many other expenses that we because we manage the buildings on our facilities and we manage all of the hardware on the facilities. So if something goes wrong, that 8.5 can become 5, 6 years easily, quickly.
Thank you. So having thrown out an option, I think I'm going to withdraw that option unless somebody wants to reinstate it. I think we keep going with the other 7 and then vote on the entire column without the override.
I guess
So-
I have a question. And maybe I misinterpret, so it would help me clarify. We've already voted on Article 2 budget and Article 5 budget.
No,
Yeah, I thought we did. We voted to approve them.
no, we're voting on Article 5 right now. We voted on Article 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So Article 5 was the reduced budget.
Right, which we have not voted on.
Okay. So I guess what's, the reduced budget is 0, right? The reduced budget is, so I'm
This
just,
is one of the big 8 that has the cuts that goes towards the reduced budget.
right. So I'm just trying to understand the logic that we're trying to vote on here. We have a reduced services budget, so I'm just trying to understand the discussions and the logic that we're voting on here. Do we recommend, we have to recommend a budget. That's kind of the key thing. That's why Article 5 is there, because we can't go into next fiscal year without a budget. Now, whether it's the overrided budget or whether it's the reduced service budget, we need a budget. So I'm trying to figure out, we can either agree to it or disagree to it. Are we trying to figure out where to move different money?
I can see Heather's look over there while you're talking about this, because I don't think this is a silly exercise, I'll be honest with you, because when we went through this reduced services budget before, so again, you made a comment last week about, and hopefully I won't be the anti-library guy, right? And none of us are for or against anything. In my opinion, we didn't get into the details of this budget, like how you sat with department heads and you figured this out. We weren't involved in those conversations, so I don't know. I even went through all the budgets you sent, right? But I can't sit down and know when you sat down with the police chief, how you got to the actual staffing. Like, how is it that we're getting to the talking points that are getting put out there, right? That are saying we won't have police coverage, we won't have police patrols. Like, how did we, those are the things that aren't in any document anywhere. At least not that I've seen. How did we get to that level of detail? That's why I thought this conversation was important, because that's what I don't know, because again, last week, you brought up the library last week, right? Like, I wasn't even going there, but I looked at that this week, that's $200,000, right? So there were some vague statements about, we'd still have to keep the building going, we'd still have to do this and that, but, I mean, me personally, I'd like to see the math, because if we end up, it's not up to us whether we end up with a reduced services budget. It's up to I'd say the 5,000 people, but it's probably the 20% of the 5,000 people in town that make that decision. But that's, for me, I'm sitting there looking at big chunks of money that, to your point with recreation, I would, again, I hate this because in Facebook tomorrow there's gonna be 90 comments about this and that, but if I were to prioritize the $200,000 of the library budget versus losing our ALS license, losing police patrols in the evening, I was just curious where the math was there, if we couldn't get more from the library budget to not eliminate the reductions that would happen to the police and to the fire, but to minimize them. And that's a discussion I felt like never happened. That was my point. So we do still have to prove the whole budget, but I didn't think we ever got to that level of detail. I didn't understand how we came up with it, like this. It seems like a very daunting budget. It almost feels to me like it was created to scare people into voting for the override. It does come across like that in some ways, It looks like there's other chunks we could do there to find a softer landing. I think it would still be pretty daunting, and I still think there's a lot of people that would be really worried about it and would probably still vote for the override. That's their choice, but
Yeah,
that was my point.
Okay, I guess the issue I'm having is before we did the override, we had each of the department heads up here sharing this budget, this reduced service budget. So each one of them came up and said,
The reduced services
Yes.
budget?
yes,
No.
yes. Well, I remember, Right, joint, so each one of them came up.
That was a
and
budget
explained-
presentation before the, yeah.
Before the
Yeah.
before the town meeting, where each, and so that's where my confusion is coming in, is these numbers have been shared even before the original town meeting. And so if this is informational to kind of go over it again, that makes, I'm just, when we say vote on each one of these, it felt like that was already, that's in the past, this is informational, and we're only gonna vote on, I guess, if we agree with the current budget, the current reduced services budget.
Right, we're going to vote on the reduced services budget that's been proposed in Article 5. This is just spending a little time, and I think as Tony said, time well spent, on the 8 of them that make up 820,000 of the $835,000 deficit. And just getting a little more of the detail, because some of the general impact of them has been widely shared within the town, but the detail is what we're going to try to spend some time this evening on.
Okay.
So I would just like to have an opportunity for each of those 8 to be aired out, of which we've done 1. And with everybody's blessing, I would move on to the library.
Sounds good.
It's a couple slides. Yep, there you go. Thanks, Jeremy. So the library budget. So I think it's important to know, and I know I've said this a number of times, so when we were looking at how to come up with a reduced services budget, we tried to work with all of the small departments first and then the big departments. And the goal was, how do we keep functioning even with reductions, right? What do you need in order to still be able to open the doors, still be able to provide services? It's not going to be the same level of services, but what do you need? So as we talked about last week, and I know I've said it in a number of presentations, that looks entirely different for every single department. Yes, we could have cut a solid number, a solid percentage from every single department, but it would have meant there were many departments that wouldn't be able to function, right? You can't cut 10%, I use it all the time, the town accountant's position, right? We have one town accountant, no additional staff, it's 20 hours a week. Even if we have no one else here but one department, we're still required to pay the bills, still required to file things annually, still required to file for the tax rate, all of those pieces. That individual still has to be here, and she barely has enough time to get the hours in now. So you can't really touch that. So what we did do is say, well, what can you give us? Can you reduce your mileage? Can you reduce your training? What can we reduce? Do you have a small departments, do you have a software or a tool you're using that you don't absolutely need? It makes life easier to have, but you don't absolutely need it. Let's reduce it by there. So everyone tried to contribute to these reductions. That's why the numbers are not equal across the board. As Mark mentions, the 3 large departments bear the brunt of it because they have the largest budget. If you think about when you're looking at those departmental numbers, right, and you go to, let's see, I'm in the wrong spot here, okay. So even, let's see, fire department, the level services budget was 1.2 million. Police department, it was 1.2 million, and DPW was 963,000. The next highest budget for a department you get to after that is the library, right, at $206,000. So there's a $700,000 plus gap between the library and then one of those large 3 budgets. That's why those smaller departments, even though you're taking smaller chunks, there's not as much to take, right? And that's why the numbers ended up the way they did. So the library budget, the reductions here, right? Same thing. How do we continue keeping the doors of the library open and still functioning? And there are impacts to this. It looks like a small enough number. It's a little bit less, it's a little bit less than 12,000 between the 2 different budgets, but overall it's still an $8,000 reduction from the prior year, or a 4.3% cut. There's not a lot here in these lines in the first place. This retains all of the staffing to the same levels they currently are, so there's no reductions, which means there's no increases or need to budget for unemployment. What it does do is it looks at the purchase services, the supplies, and does reductions there. So it takes out the building maintenance lines, it takes out anything that they don't have to have, and they're gonna have to seek other funds or hold off on doing things that they need to do to the building and maintenance to be able to stay up to date on things. But this still provides a service to the residents, it still provides, the staffing and materials they need to start. What it does do, unfortunately, we always budget, and we have for a number of years, budgeted the library at pretty much the minimum number we can budget in order to get state aid certification. This number reduction drops us below what we would need to qualify for state aid certification. We can apply for a waiver. We may get it, we may not get it. It depends. They look at a bunch of factors, including the number of waivers we've had in the past. They also look at where we are with the reduction for this department compared to other departments. So if we were to cut the library more than we cut the majority of the other departments, that would put us in a worse position and less likely possibility of getting a waiver. So all of those factors were considered in this. So going back to this, if you look, right, so you have the library director salary, employee wages, youth service, librarian services right there. That's the bulk of the budget in those three lines. The library books and materials is a state-required calculation based on the rest of the numbers in the budget, and that's how that number is derived. But the majority of it is people. As we did talk about last week, some folks look at this and say it's an easy $200,000, we can reduce it and we can save a position here or there. The problem is that, first of all, our town meeting isn't until June 27th. And theoretically speaking, we should be giving people at least 60 days' notice if you're going to lay anyone off, which means you still have to pay 2 months of the wages in those first four lines, right? In addition to that, then you're gonna have to budget 20 to 30% of the wages to cover unemployment. On top of that, you're still gonna have the expenses to operate the building fully for the first 2 months, and then after that, you still have to pay to make sure there's heat on in that building, because you can't let the pipes freeze and still maintain those other pieces. So it's not,
So Heather, let me,
Trusts get rescinded.
oh, and then the trusts get rescinded, which means then you run into all kinds of issues with that. So it's not unfortunately something that we can take away now and add back later. It has other ramifications and implications right away that need to be considered.
so Heather, I don't want it to be floating out here. I don't think anybody here is advocating closing the library or cutting it by $201,000 or $206. The cuts that are being proposed are $12,000. Nobody wants them to lose certification, nobody wants any positions displaced, loss of accreditation, none of that. My question is, can the trust funds that the library has, which is at the tune of about $152,000, 96,000 of it possibly could be used to help with this particular 12. That's not a statement as much as it's a question, but a fair question, I think, to ask. Can it be subsidized by the use of those funds? Pam?
Hi, Pam Schoenevert. Thank you, everybody. I just want to clarify, I did do a 10-minute presentation on the reduced budget and the impacts it would have on library. The bulk of the trust funds you're looking at, Mark, is the Bridges Memorial Library Trust Fund, which legally can only be used for the maintenance of the building. That is all it can be used for, legally. The Howland Trust can be used for books. I plan to use it, which is what the reduced number there is. State aid can be used. Right now we use it for technology. We have no technology budget. We have no equipment budget. This leaves us maybe toilet paper and some paper. So I understand what you're saying. However, I would like to point out a couple of things while we're here. The library budget is on average for the last 15 years has been on an average of increase of 1.28% per year. This compares to the town about 4.4% and the schools 4.05%. Our increase in our total budget on average from 2009 has been $32,806. I'm sorry, I just need to say this. The library budget is not the driving force of the budget issues. I respect the decisions and opinions of this committee. I'd like to point out there are not 5,000 voters in town, respectfully. Many of our users are not voters, they are under 18. Just like the schools, we protect their services, we should protect them for the library. Summer reading starts Thursday. I'd like it to continue like planned. I'd also like to say, as the library director, part of my job is to protect the library services that are utilized by the residents of the town of Paxton. If we lose certification, you don't just lose your library in town. Residents cannot use any library in Massachusetts. This includes Holden, Worcester, Leicester, wherever you like to go. They are not legally required to service you. You can also not download from Boston Public Library. If you lose certification, you are losing your library services. This is important to some people. I know it's not life-saving for some people. It is critical to many of our families in town. They have said so. I know it by the numbers. Certification would be on the line if we go any lower than this. Then, like I said, certification matters. And if we do end up having to apply for a waiver and receive a waiver, we'll still get a 12% reduction in our state aid just this year. If we don't get it, we have to wait 2 years to apply again, a loss of $48,000 plus money in state aid. And I also want to point out I've gotten $45,000 in grants for the town in the past year, which does help. I just would like everyone to realize the impact of this. I've cut everywhere I can. We are running at minimum at this point. It's very hard to cover even vacations. I haven't taken vacation. I'm taking 2 days this week. We can't cover sick time. We're at our minimum, and I respect all the departments, and I know we're all doing our best, and we don't want to see any of our services cut.
Pam, can I have a quick follow-up question? You said those funds can't be used for other than maintenance and building. So now my question is there something of a maintenance building nature in your budget that you could shift the funds to cover those and then not have the cuts that you're recommending?
Thank you, Mark. I did take, so purchase services for us covers building maintenance, typical HVAC, cleaning, that kind of thing, and it covers $5,700 for our network fee. We need to begin CW MERS. So I already took it out in the reduced services budget. I took out every cent of the maintenance. All that's left is the CW MERS fee. All of the maintenance we can cover through the trust fund. But that is all it can be used for. That's not $96,000. It's going to be 10 or 12 that we can use. That we cannot supplement the entire budget. In order to get certification, it also has to be municipally funded, not trust fund funded. So if the town isn't funding the library, it's not going to get certified. We can't get rid of snow plowing and ask Holden, can you come plow our roads? We can't ask another town to subsidize services. And that's true for library services as well as would be for asking someone else to plow your roads. If the trust fund could be used in other ways, it would be great, but it legally cannot.
So one other point, I think you mentioned that you're going to respect any decision that the Finance Committee makes. The decision that the Finance Committee makes is to agree to the cuts that you and the town administrator are putting forward. It's not our decision to make the cuts. It's our decision to embrace those that you've put forward. So I think that's different.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. So how about MIS, Informational Technology Account 1155, which I'm jumping over Police, Fire,
I
DPW.
noticed.
The IT budget, so with the override is 134, or level services 134, 381, and reduced services 101, 181. The difference here, so I know it's under the level services budget. Whenever we've talked about the FY25 level services budget as a whole, we always mention a couple of the exceptions, and one of them is in IT. That includes a substantial amount of that $30,000 in the equipment line for an upgrade of our IT infrastructure. At the annual town meeting, we voted to repurpose funds that were originally for VoIP phones that were left over to the tune of $15,000 to put towards upgrading our IT network infrastructure for our Wi-Fi and increase and enhance our cybersecurity as a result. In doing so, that $15,000, we still need just about $30,000 based on the most recent quote to upgrade everything. And that is the substantial part that you see in equipment. The difference between the FY25 level services budget as proposed and the reduced services budget is the mostly the elimination of the equipment line.
So I think the point I would, first of all, I have a question about cyber security, but let me make my point. If we do cut this particular budget as being proposed by $33,000, that still places that particular department at an increase over the prior year. So when we talk about cuts,
So we
I think
haven't.
that's an interesting note to make, that it's still an increase over 2024. It's a cut from the budget with the override, but it's not a cut away from what was the prior year budgeted amount.
Yes, Jeremy, can you turn on 2 pages down, purchase, thank you. So that's our purchase services line, right? So that number actually is down from last year, and part of it was we had initially intended having some of the consultant numbers from the year before. All the pieces added together, this is the revised with the services we have, right? So this is stuff that we don't really have the ability to cut unless, in some cases, we're going back to paper and pen, right? We have reverse 911 on this. We have services for our cyber, Sophos or firewalls. We also have the town's website. We actually pull from this and put it over to the town's cable. We have our hosting of our website. We have the town accounting software. So those are essential pieces just to operate. There's nothing extra. It's not like Adobe PDF or any of those additional pieces. These are just services that we have as standard. Can you go to the next one, please? So that's the consultant page. So last year in FY '24, this current year rather than FY '24, we did end up paying more than $30,000. We had gone out to bid. We were originally looking at a different structure to how we were doing IT. And then we found that there was a way to do it so it was all encompassing with all needs instead of just trying for myself and Sean to manage everything in-house and then have someone outside try to help us. So this was the way to do it all in-house. So we ended up, for FY '24, the contract amount was higher than $30,000. At a select board meeting earlier this fiscal year, there was a vote to award a sole source procurement to the same IT consultant for this year, and the contractual amount is listed there at $44,550. So that is why there's an increase, because the cost of the service is higher.
Any further questions? How about public building maintenance, account 1192? Change of 8,141.
So on this one here, we already reduced a little bit of our custodian wages. So the year prior, we had budgeted an 8-hour position. It was something we didn't think was going to come to fruition, weren't going to be able to do. We expanded in FY '24 to an 18-hour-a-week position. Sometimes closer to those 18 hours used, sometimes a lower amount. That covers the services for doing custodial, routine cleaning, as well as handy person work at the town hall, this building, as well as the council on aging and the DPW. So because we were using at a lower trend, we reduced the hours for FY '25's level service in the first place. And in order to get down to the reduced services budget, we reduced it even more substantially, making it so there's no additional hours and we weren't ever going to go up on the hours there to be able to handle the reduction. The other reduction there is public safety building purchase services. Mike, the fire chief, was able to work closely with vendors as well as looking at numbers we absolutely had to have on things, and was able to reduce it as low as he possibly could for those numbers.
So Heather, the custodian is not being displaced, just the hours are being reduced.
He's not being displaced, the hours would be reduced. He started to gradually increase his hours as we've been having more and more work for the different buildings. And we never got up to that full 18 currently, so we're okay. But if the person were to leave the position for any reason, it's gonna be, as you can imagine, harder to hire someone for less than at least an 18-hour-a-week position.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess one thing I want to say about, and there's been a theme here, we're talking about taking money away and, what it will do if people, but I think part of my belief, part of my job is to say financially, what is the right thing for the town? I understand that it could be difficult at times for some of the individuals to pay some additional money, but I look at my responsibility is to provide guidance to say, what does the town need to do financially? And so, we've talked a little bit about these reduced services. I think the risk is this is not my personal opinion. We could see what the rest of the committee said. These are not good for the town. Nothing in the FY '25 reduced services is good for our town. And so I just, I know we're trying to figure out, well, do we lose a body? It gets worse when we have to talk about the fire and the police department. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to say that my personal opinion is that the reduced services budget is a bad place for the town to go to. And as much as we try to understand what these little pieces are doing and how bad it is, from a financially responsible place for the town, it's a dangerous place to be.
Okay. Building Department,
Should be the next.
1241.
So this one here, so with the override, 71,581, without the override, 63,440. Oh, am I in the right one? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong line. My apologies. Try that again. $53,008 for the override, without the override, $40,608. You will notice the electrical inspector as well as the plumbing gas inspector, regardless, they both increased this past year. Keep in mind that with those two positions, so what happens is we only pay when they go out and do an inspection, and they only go out and do an inspection 95% of the time, unless it's a public safety issue. They're only doing the inspection because we got paid for them to go do the inspection, right? So we're not paying them unless we pull in the revenue side. So because we've been looking at the trends of our inspections and how many we expect to have happen, we were trying to calculate what we anticipated for FY '25. Regardless of whether we're on level services or reduced services, we still would expect the same number of permits. We don't expect people to do less work or pull less permits based on which budget we're adopting. So that's why those numbers are higher, and that's why the numbers are higher in both categories, or both budget versions. Local building inspector wages, that is where we have someone cover, either when the building commissioner is out, or for some reason if there's other permits, or even some backlog, he's able to help us go out and do those. Just like the other two inspectors, we pay a flat fee for that. So that gets us from the difference. In this case, the reduced services allows him to pretty much go out and do about 10 inspections versus the level services budgets for 20. What we found this year is when, on the occasion, the building commissioner does not actually get to his 19 hours a week, we're able to move funds over to the local building inspector if we have some backlog or some other things to go out and take care of. So this reduces the available hours for the building commissioner. I don't know if I have the number there. If you can go down, Jeremy, to the next page, it will give me more specifics. Okay, there we go. So it reduces it from 19 hours to 13 hours a week. So what happens is, he should still be able to keep up with inspections, but the part that we don't always think about is the zoning enforcement calls we get, right? So someone calls in and says, hey, I have a concern with this property over there, or I think this is a violation of zoning, I need someone to go out and take a look at it. Well, that's part of the building commissioner's job to be able to do. So reducing the hours puts a strain on when he can get to all of the building inspections, as well as potential strain on any zoning enforcement matters, and things will potentially start getting delayed.
Are you saying it will create those problems, or it has the potential of creating those problems?
Well, because I don't have a magic 8 ball and knowing what the traffic is like for next year, and maybe everyone gets along with everybody and there's never a complaint and we're all good. But currently, whenever there's an issue or there's a problem with the violation of zoning, sometimes, it could take several hours, it could take court time, it could take all of these pieces for the building commissioner to be able to do that. And at some point, we'd have to prioritize whether it's gonna be people who are calling for an inspection that he spends that up to 13 hours a week on, or whether it's people who are calling because they have a zoning enforcement piece, or we're gonna just end up backlogging and delaying.
So this committee was anxious to be doing some things in economic development and permits and getting a better business-friendly reputation. Is this going to harm that inappropriately?
It could. It could very well delay how quickly he's able to get out to actually do an inspection for new businesses or things that are changed. There's no way to tell for sure until we get to the next year and what the log of work is that comes in. And then he's gonna end up prioritizing things based on legal requirements. So if he has a timeline legally by Mass General laws or Code of Mass Regs that he has to get something done, he's gonna have to prioritize that over something else that might seem like it's a higher priority, but not have a timeline attached.
Okay, so that concludes the 5 that were in that second category. So now we're on to DPW, police and fire. How about DPW first?
Sure. So as I talked about a little bit earlier when we were talking about the IT budget, so DPW has 2 caveats on increases from last year that are outside of the level services theme that everything else pretty much has. And one of them, which is the big one, is MS4 permit work. So you see there it jumped from $6,800 to $92,000. If you remember last year for FY24's budget, we talked about the increase of the expected cost for MS4. MS4 is the unfunded mandate for stormwater from the state. We have to do this, is what they tell us, but we don't get any money really to be able to do the work. Each year that we have a permit with them, this year we're going to be entering into the 6th year, there's additional requirements and things we need to, things we need to be able to meet. Those additional obligations, like I said, last year we were able to put off some of the requirements over to ARPA funds. We already had some other projects going to try to get us up to current compliance with MS4, and we're pretty much there now. The additional cost for the Article 2 level services budget for FY25 has the additional amount for that year 6 piece. And the Article 5 reduced services reduces that number back down to 30,000, getting us as low as we possibly can go, but still puts us in the position of losing our hard-worked for compliance that we're currently about to be in. The other line here that is different, the purchase services, you see there's a jump there. That was for guardrails. We've spent a bunch of time at a number of meetings talking about this. So there's a couple areas in town that have some of the more old-fashioned guardrails, and they don't work. They don't do their job, which is keeping people safe, right? We recently had an accident where they actually went through the guardrail, which was there to keep them from doing so, but it didn't. They ended up on the side, and we did get the guardrail, I believe, substantially replaced, but it's the same guardrail that was there because that's what insurance pays for. To upgrade at least 2 sections of guardrail would be about $60,000. This is something I know Travis has been talking with the Finance Committee since at least the budget going into FY23, if not sooner, about the need for this, and that's why it was put into the level services budget this year, because there was a high need for that for increased safety for the town. The difference is in the FY25 level services budget versus the reduced services budget, they're reducing the replacement cost of the guardrails down to about $2,000 for jersey barriers. So another part of the guardrail fails, they'll end up putting up Jersey barriers, right? Yeah. And hoping that they keep people from going off the side of the road, because that's all we'll be able to afford on that. Other costs that are going into this, we reduce the ability to do as much overtime, which means that we're not going to be able to do cemetery burials on the weekend. It's gonna have to be during the week, so that could be a hardship for some folks. We also reduce the cost or the ability to purchase asphalt and tar, because it is pretty expensive. As a result, when they're doing repairs to the roads, not, your regular paving, that's chapter 90, or the town's road stabilization account, but smaller repairs that they generally do in-house, those ones will have to be restricted to cold patching, because that's the only thing we'll be able to cover the cost of for that piece. Other things that will come out, because we don't have to do them, we just like to do them because they're a better safety implement, is, for instance, line painting. Right, so that does not exist currently in the reduced services budget line. And I think that's most of, and then repairs and maintenance, anything that costs too much will just have to be put off either to the end of the year to see if we can afford it, or we won't be able to tackle it.
So the MS4 permanent work, stormwater, in the budget, a year ago, it was 6,800. Then it went to 90,000, and now it's cut to 30,000.
What was higher than that? Jeremy, can you flip to that one? It should be the second to last in the DPW section. Oh, can you make it bigger by any
Thought it
chance?
was on the first page.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then to scroll over just a little bit more to the numbers. Awesome, all right, so last year, the cost was gonna be closer to $36,800, but we offset 30,000 of it by removing it and putting it out of ARPA.
Right. So are there any more, because I think there's been 135 some odd thousand of funding of this MS4 out of ARPA? Are there any ARPA funds that can be recharacterized to help out? Or no?
So
Is that
the
all, is everything encumbered?
So I think the MS4 is all set, like that's contracted out 100% of what we have for the MS4 and the ARPA piece. This did come up again last night, so there are a few funds, small amounts of funds with projects, but they're not gonna get you anything that's of substance to impact that.
So Travis, can I direct a question toward you? I think last night you spoke to the point that there could be, or just grab a mic, there could be possible penalties, but you also said that they've not been, to your knowledge, been imposed to any municipalities. So the question is not to roll the dice and hope they're not imposed on us, but is there a correction period? If we're out of compliance, do we have a year, 3 years, 5 years, or 2 weeks to correct?
So to date, according to our consultants, we have not been given any length of time where there's a correction, duration of period, to make corrections. In speaking with our consultants, Fuss and O'Neill, who have been working with us to do a lot of this MS4 permitting work, they're telling us that to date, to the best of their knowledge, no city or town has been fined for being in non-compliance. There's been strongly worded letters and recommendations made, but to date, no fines. Now, that doesn't mean that starting tomorrow, that won't change, as that's always a possibility. But what we're being told, as of right now, they're not expecting to see. This was a really tough decision for us to try to make these types of cuts. I believe we were looking at somewhere around 27% to the DPW budget from what we had proposed. A lot of it being unfunded mandates and safety concerns. We're short-staffed already as it is, and I believe in coming to Finance Committee the last couple of years, I've been telling you we need 2 more staff members specifically just for stormwater work, because there's that much work that's out there that needs to be done, because our infrastructure is failing. We're taking a large cut in what we had proposed. It's difficult for us to to figure out where to draw from, right? So for us to make this decision to take the funding out of the unfunded mandates from the state for the stormwater MS4 permit, it was a difficult decision, but ultimately, in order for us to do the remainder of our work, if we were to cut staff, we'd be looking at losing 2 additional staff members. And it still wouldn't have made up for the entirety of what we needed to cut to meet this reduced budget. So we made tough calls and we tried to do the best that we could.
Yeah, I think we all know the seriousness of it, and that's why this was a cut that you advanced. That's why some of us, me in particular, were a little surprised that you would offer that as a cut.
Yeah, and it's not a cut I wanted to make, I'll tell you. But it was either that or we were looking at staffing as the police and fire are looking at staffing. Because to remove or reduce any other line items more than we've already reduced, we're going to be not able to do our jobs as needed.
Yeah.
You know, even just taking out the short amount of money that we had listed for asphalt, that's making repairs to berms or sidewalks that get damaged over the winter. We get 20, 30 complaints, maybe more, every year for these types of jobs, and we haven't been able to meet all of them to date with the funds that we have. So we're going to completely eliminate those processes, and you know, it's a tough call. It's a tough call. We're trying to do the best we can. We're trying to cut where we can't cut, basically.
Okay, thank you. Heather, and maybe Mark, police, you want to take us through that?
Sure, and get us started, and I'm sure the chief can supplement anything.
12:10, yep.
So the police budget, the override amount is, or the level services, Article 2 amount is $1,296,520. Without the override, the reduced services is $952,521. So with the override, it's mostly the same cost as the year before with contractual obligations, so increases for the employee contracts. The majority of the police budget, just as very similar to the fire budget, is people. That's what makes up most of that budget. In the police budget, reduction, you'll see here, so you have your basic increases for the police chief's salary, lieutenant's salary, admin assistants. You will see that in the employee wage number, you go from $780 to $852 in the level services, and then you do a drop of about 31% down to $538,000. The other numbers, when you get down below purchase services, you see an increase for Article 2 and then a reduction of 19.7% from FY24 for the reduced services. And same thing in the supply line, you're reducing almost in half. The police dues, you know, just to stay members of things, it still increases, it continues to go up, and then the cruiser lease, again, we're obligated to pay. So it's just those, mainly the 3 lines there, the employee wages being the bulk of it, because that's the bulk of the funding that we have. So it would mean a reduction in staffing from 10 to 7 officers, resulting in 2 layoffs and 1 position continuing to be unfilled. The town would be unable to continue the school resource traffic officer, unable to staff the overnight patrol, unable to continue community policing programs, unable to advance officer education with outside and specialized training, and it also would be a major shift in how we currently do policing in town, and we would go from being a proactive police department to a reactive police department. We would not have the funding to be able to have officers out on the road and doing additional patrols. They would be able to only respond to calls.
Heather and Mark, the number of things with these cuts in this department have caught our attention. One is nighttime service. I guess a couple of questions. Is the state going to allow that? And what does that do with the relationship with Anna Maria? And can Anna Maria be looked to with the relationship and the agreement to help out in this regard? Is that a possibility?
Heather, I can take care of that. here so you don't have to talk to you back. With the 26% that we're required, that we were asked to cut, 91.5% of our budget is payroll. So we reduced everything in our purchase services and our supplies that we could, that we're not required to pay with contracts. We reduced our gas budget to a level that really is ridiculous. We're actually losing 4 people, because I have 2 positions that are unfilled that I refused to fill because I knew that there was an override coming. And I didn't want to take the chance if the override failed that those people would leave a department to come here and then lose their job. So I have 2 positions unfilled, and I'm still going to lose 2 more. That is going to affect staffing at the college, because as I don't get to choose who gets laid off. Right? Contractually, the senior people are staying, last in are the first ones out. So all my junior guys are the ones that are taking the brunt of being laid off. That being said, I have to shift positions now. So some of the people that are on the town are going to be up Anna Maria, which means their budget is going to increase. So that's why I can't replace the 4th person, because their budget, not through them causing this, but because of this override, their budget is going to increase to cover the senior officers that will now be patrolling their campus. So, at night, it takes three officers to run a 4 and 2 shift. 4 on, 2 off, that's to have 2 officers on a shift. So with 3 positions down, there is no other place I can take from. So Anna Maria's officers will be on their campus. And yes, if there's nothing going on, or they're not at a call up there, they will be able to respond to a call in town. If there is something going on up there, then we have 2 options. We can reach out to state police. They run 2 in a desk, meaning they got 2 people covering the Brookfield barracks. Will they be available, and how long will it take? Who knows? And, we always use mutual aid, but now we're going to strain other towns, because they're going to be giving their services to us because we can't fund our own. So it's going to put an effect on our relationship with our surrounding agencies. There is this number reduction. I know I'm not supposed to use scare tactics, but the reality is, this is reality. I can't operate. The police department is not operating like a police department with these cuts. There is no more patrol because we don't have the gas money. Let's go a step further. I don't have money for court. So if they stop a car or make an arrest, the money I have in overtime covers, I don't even know if it'll cover my contractual obligations for holiday pay and vacation buybacks. So we are pretty much, like Heather said, we are response only. We're going to be sitting here waiting for a call. I've cut everywhere I can cut. And if I added money into my supplies or purchase services to put more gas money in, then I have to cut from somewhere else. And the only place to cut from is personnel. And I'm already cutting in pretty deep. If you look at my purchase services and my supplies, if I cut those 100%, which I can't do, but if I did, that's only $110,000. And I gotta cut $342,000. So, this is what we're facing. We'll do the best we can, but to say that, the way we operate, there's gonna be a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions?
My only question, and I hate having to ask these tough questions. It sucks. And my only question, I appreciate going through all this in detail. That wasn't even what I was looking for when I brought this up at the last meeting. I just wanted to ask the questions that weren't coming through on paper and in the April 8th meeting, which was, when you guys sat down and figured this out, did you try to just minimize it's a huge impact. I mean, look at the dollars there. And I did do the exercise of going out and comparing your budget to other towns this size. that reduced services budget would be a lot lower than other towns this size, that I saw. So, me being skeptical and digging through this, I did the homework, and I didn't see any others that were under $1 million, anywhere in the state. So that is a lot to ask. And that's all I was curious was if you guys look to just, like I said, I know it's not 5,000 voters, I misspoke on that earlier, but we don't get to, I'm worried, the feedback I get from people is I'm worried about which way this is gonna go if we tried to minimize the impact instead of just eliminating. I know we can't get rid of the whole 261,000, but did you guys come up with a number that said, Heather, if I can get this much back from somewhere else, then the night patrol doesn't have to go away, even though I'll still absorb, 200,000 or 190,000 or, and it may not even be feasible, but I just wondered if you guys had that conversation or looked at
The percentage-wise was, with the 26% was the percentage I was given.
Yeah.
And with that percentage, it's so astronomical in today's day and age, especially when 91.5% of your budget is personnel.
Right. And that might be more for you, Heather. I don't know if you went through that exercise when you were doing this. That's what I hope. That was my concern with this, was did we just throw the 26% at you, or did we try to did we look for ways to just say, hey, you're still gonna be stuck with a cut if this fails, but how do we do it so we don't? Because my opinion, right, everybody's voting on right now is the big, and I hate to use the scare tactics, it is scary. It's not a tactic, it is scary. But that's what people are looking at. They're not looking at everything else we talked about. They're looking at the night patrols going away and the fire EMS impact. That's the big thing everyone's focused on.
So,
I hope, yeah.
so I know I've gone through this a couple times, so I can do it again. So when we initially looked at what we had for a deficit, or the budget gap of the, approximately 840,000 or so forth, we went through everything we had and said, what are we not legally required to provide for a service? So anything that was not legally required, a couple $100 for annual town reports, PDF software, the recreation piece, like all of those pieces, we went through everything. We went through all of the small budgets, and then we got down to the number that was left. The number that was left, like I said, it then went to those three departments. We looked at FY '24's budget, so what amount of money compared just to the three of them, each other, was their '24 budget? What was their requested, what was their modified '24 budget if you account for any revenues that came in from that department? And then what was the request for FY '25 budget? And then, again, just those three pieces. So if they were the only ones that made up the pie, what percentage of the pie did they make up? And then we took that at the very end, we averaged those three percentages out to figure out what the number was. And then that was the reduction that was assigned to each of those departments. So it feels arbitrary, but it was really based on, how big of their piece of the slice of the pie it was. Because they're all essential services, and
Well, right, but
It's
my
really
question
hard to
is,
make
when
one
you
versus the
got
other.
to that number, and then the discussion came, well, because of that number, there will be no night patrol, did you assign a number to that? How much would I have to get back to mitigate that?
So what ends up happening, right? So each of these department heads know what they're doing in their departments, and they're gonna know what they need to be able to provide some level of service and be able to operate and be able to function. So once we came up with that number, it was really up to the department head to say, this is how we'd have to do it, this is what we'd have to reduce.
Okay.
I think as the police chief has already stated, his hands are tied in many ways, because as with all of our departments, the three large ones, we have collective bargaining agreements that say what goes away first. So when what goes away first is the folks who, might be less senior, might be newer and everything else, then what's left is the higher cost folks, and then the calculations go from there.
One other question, if that 242 that you're going to take, that doesn't include the unemployment or the severance and all that, right? So that number is, just so everybody's aware, there's even a bigger number.
Yes.
That we're not, this is just the budget.
Yep.
We had that back in the earlier screen that we showed at the bottom. We're adding $78,000 to unemployment.
Right.
So as much as there have been some cuts, one of the departments increased to cover the likelihood of unemployment.
Right.
Thanks, chief.
Any other questions?
Fire and EMS.
Oh, that's a tiny screen. All right, so the level services, fire department's $1.2 million and some change. The reduced services budget is $1,023,429. The difference from FY '24 of a reduction of 197,000 or 16.19%. So again, you have fire chief contractual obligations. The bulk of everything is in the wages. It would be a reduction of 343%. And that's probably not entirely calculated out because you have to calculate in 5014 and 5013 together, and then you'd have to do the difference, which I didn't do. So it's less than 343%. You have the admin wages, so you'd be reducing the administrative assistant down to 0. There is an amount we had to go back and put in for our Article 5 because we realized that since we're doing town meeting so late, we'd still have to fund for the first 2 months. So that's what's there, and then the rest calculates down into unemployment, as Mark referenced earlier. Purchase services, so anything that they could reduce, the fire chief was able to reduce, and, you know, again, we'll be doing without on that. Got the supplies down to the minimum, equipment in the ambulance lease is a standardized cost. So, as we've talked about in prior meetings, and I think it came up again last evening, the downside, or there's many downsides, but one of the big downsides of doing a reduction of staff for fire and EMS personnel and being able to staff an ambulance less is that we'd also be pulling in less revenues. So it's almost like we're getting hit twice, right? We're reducing the staff, and then we're also reducing the likelihood of what we're gonna pull in next year, because we're not gonna be able to do as many calls. We're not gonna be able to send out 2 ambulances. We're gonna have times where we don't have enough staff to fund the ability to staff the ambulance at all. We're gonna be losing, I think, up to about 20 on-call part-time firefighters, with another reduction there.
So the question that I have is the catch-22 scenario that's, you just alluded to without so saying, but it was kind of alluded to last evening, and that is reduced ambulance service reduces the amount of ambulance receipts, which has been an attractive cost-sharing, revenue-sharing for the department budget. So taking Tony's point, there's a scary piece sitting in your budget cuts too, Mike. Nobody wants cutting EMS service, so notwithstanding the catch-22, the ambulance fund currently has a pretty substantial balance of $660-some-odd thousand. Can any of that be used to mitigate this particular issue that we're confronted with?
Yeah, I mean, I need $100,000. That answer your question right away, Tony? I can
All right, so now
restore.
you're down to 566.
I can restore the one-day loss of coverage with about $100,000 and no full-time layoffs. That's what we're looking at right now, because that would reduce then the unemployment benefits.
I think that's good for people to hear, you know, because that's the number that, you know,
I can't get the call guys back with that. I'd have to go back to at least another $100,000 to restore that side. So about $200,000. If you remember back in the finance presentation, March 6th, when I first came out to do the budget presentation, my numbers were 460 on the ambulance revenue side that I could do. And the discussion around that 460 was generally the ambulance generates between $460,000 and $480,000 a year. The COVID years were good years on the ambulance revenue side. Not so much for the people with COVID, but for the town it was. It allowed us to roll over about anywhere between $150,000 to $175,000 per year, thus building up that little bit. The goal of that is to replace capital items and to keep the service running. But each year it fluctuates depending on call volume. During the COVID years, 21, 22, we saw a lot of mutual aid. A lot of that mutual aid went to the city of Worcester, the town of Leicester, Holden, the bigger towns that were getting inundated. Paxton was even up 25% on its EMS calls. We saw that, we reaped some of the benefits of that, which was good. But we also wore out a lot of equipment. One of our trucks is over 10 years old. In the past, we replaced them at 10 years old. I'm trying to get 15 years out of it. It's not great. We also spent $61,000 at the annual town meeting to replace 2 Lucas chest compression devices and a cardiac monitor. So with that said, I don't want to lose a cushion, because if we have a bad year on EMS revenue, that will continue the service for another 1 or 2 years. I'd love to have 5 years in there, but it just doesn't happen, and I'd love to replace an ambulance, which right now they're anywhere between $350,000 and $500,000. But to get us out of this mess on the fire side, yeah, I'm willing to do something to fix this. The problem is I don't know where we end, and again, it's a one-time fix.
So, Mike, we're all trying to find solutions here. So I'm going to pick up on your $100,000 item that you candidly shared with us a minute
Yep.
ago, and take you up on taking us back to the early part of our budget process, where you graciously offered $460,000 toward the revenue sharing, and we said 400 would be fine, you keep 60. So I'm doing simple math here. If you need 100 and we pushed back 60, can you find another 40 to eliminate what is the boogeyman in your budget cut here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you could do that.
I think we can, yeah. But it's not going to bring us up to a full complement.
No, I understand.
Yeah. And we're also, that's going to ensure 2 people per shift, staffing minimum. So when the ambulance is out of town, we're not going to have call people coming back, maybe 2 or 3. So we're going to be at dangerously low levels of staffing.
And that's assuming, this is all assuming that we have to go to the contingent budget, and it's a all or nothing, so that still doesn't solve the police, and other areas side of it. So you might have a solution, like a tough solution, but, right.
I'd love to have the solution for everybody.
Right.
I'd,
So I just want to get that so it's clear.
I'd love
like,
that $1 million
it'd be great if
in
you
there
can-
to say, here you
Right.
go, let's fix the problem.
Yeah, but I think maybe what, you and Tony now have knit together the whole hour and a half we spent on this. What, in the event of a failed override, we don't want it to be as bad as it's been projected.
No.
So if you can come back to the table and revisit some of what you've just talked about, that's more reassuring to me as a townsperson, forget a finance committee member, that there's a way to maybe restore that, thinking a little bit outside of the box, as opposed to cut, and hope that the override passes.
Yeah.
Because we're watching the tea leaves ourselves, and our job this evening is, what if it doesn't pass? And are we giving the best budget to the townspeople going forward? And to Ben's point, or are the cuts too severe? And you've added a slight ray of hope, quite frankly, to what you just.
Well, it's all been doom and gloom for the last couple of months. I like to lighten the room up a little bit. But, yeah, 100,000 will fix that layoff issue. I'm going to have to come back to reserve and hopefully a special town meeting in November to fix the rest of it on my end, but that would be.
And I don't want to get ahead of anything or the committee, but maybe next year, the ambulance receipts that comes forward is not 400,000. Maybe it reverts back to the 300,000, which has been the average. But can we get a short-term fix as we're making our way through a long-term fix, is really the point and the message, so.
Yeah, one question I have, when you say get the 100,000, where, are you I'm just trying to understand where this 100,000 is coming from. You're going to find it reallocate budget? Is it gonna be given to you? Where,
No, right now, so just to answer Tony, because he asked, Mark,
Right.
what's the number?
Right.
What makes it work? My number's 100,000. I'm a pretty easy guy. But ultimately, the 400,000 or 460, what I put forth, is really the cap on spending that ambulance revenue every year, outside of buying smaller pieces of equipment or getting an ambulance in the future. Because if we go beyond that 460, we're setting ourselves up for a slide backwards on the revenue the next year. So I'll tell you right now, as of May 31st, we've done 821 calls. Now, that's not all transports. But if you took that, realistically look at it about maybe 300 or 460 of those calls roughly, if you multiply it by 1,000, that's what we bring in every year. So if we go underneath that, right, because we do mutual aid calls, and that's where we do get some of that revenue from. If we go slide underneath, and in the stats, our going to Worcester has dropped significantly over the last 2 years, we could start sliding beyond that. That's why we had capped it for years at 300. We went 310. Last year, I think we went 350. This year, we went 400. Or last year, we did 310, and we did a $90,000 jump this year to 400. I proposed 460 in March, and that honestly offsets the taxpayer burden on the fire department. So that would set my number, that 1.255 is really 795,000. That's all you pay in taxes. So the more I can put towards it, great. But if I don't have it coming in that next year, we're going to end up being another problem of laying people off. It's a one-time solution when we go above it. This year, I love my people. I think everybody in this town loves these guys. They do tremendous work. And, just looking at some of you in the rooms, they've been in your houses. They've seen you at your worst. We don't want to scare you. The reality is 90% of the people I meet, it's on the worst day of their lives. We don't want to make that any worse by delaying care, delaying transport, delaying a fire truck getting to your house. It's not an overall fix, but I'm willing if this fails, because, that's a safety net. I think we can work with that, but it's gonna be an uphill battle moving forward. Because as you can see, our purchase services are reduced down to, I think, 60,000 from 70, which I reduced from FY '24 to '25 in creative budgeting and working extensively with the DPW to fix the trucks and share parts and oil and everything else to reduce their expenses and our expenses. They have big trucks, we have big trucks. Our equipment I reduced from '24 to '25. It's down to 5,000 now. That's fire hoods, gloves, boots, stuff that gets worn out all the time. I even reduced the medical supplies quite a bit to 16.5, and that includes uniforms, contractual uniforms. So if you take 5,000 right off the top of that, that's only $10,000. And anybody in the medical field, when we're replacing IV supplies and medications, fentanyl's a lot cheaper on the street than it is at the pharmacy. And that's the reality of it. So kind of giving you the rundown on that. So that's what I got for you. Maybe it's a little ray of sunshine, maybe not such a scare tactic, but I'm not sure where we go from here, so.
Oh, thank you.
good, thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, can you call that up again? Thank all 8 departments for answering our questions. This is difficult times, difficult questions, difficult decisions. So glad no one took any of it personally. This is the first slide that we had.
But town only.
Yeah, so what I'm going to suggest is that we take a look at the town-only budget summary, and essentially looking at the far right-hand column. If we scroll all the way to the bottom, there's no 114,000 $500. This is the budget without the override, assuming the override fails. And what I am suggesting is that we take a vote on this, and then we take a vote on Article 5. The vote on this would be essentially to accept the budgets as put forward by the town administrator and the department heads in consultation with cuts, not necessarily embracing each line item, but the total of police and fire and DPW, and make a motion to approve that, and then we'll move on to Article 5. That's a suggestion. If somebody wants to skip that and go right to Article 5, that's fine. If somebody wants to modify the suggestion, that's fine. Just a thought.
We have to approve the budget. This is where we got stuck at the town
Right.
hall meeting, right?
Right.
So I think we have to approve.
So,
I would prefer that we approve the right-hand column.
but if we're approving the 7,389,216, isn't that the exact same amount as on Article 5?
It is, but to the point, and I think I made this last week too, or the last meeting. So
like
on that
the-
other sheet, the spreadsheet shows the math.
Okay.
right?
That's, I just was asking why, that's fine.
So is there a motion to approve column to the right?
The no override reduced services budget.
Right.
So approved, so moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I guess just the one discussion that, I want to thank all the department heads for all the work, and I don't think that was done, that was their choice. I think if we asked them, do you want to submit this budget, I think all of them would have said no, my opinion. So I know how I'm going to vote for it, and I just want to thank everyone for getting us to this point.
Motion's been made and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Motion carries. Article 5. Is there a motion to approve, disapprove, or take no action on Article 5 as reads on the screen?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Article 5 passes. Under new business, Heather, I would make a suggestion that on the heels of people being confused at the annual town meeting and maybe even a little confusion circulating now, if I get asked one more time what the town election next Monday is, thinking that they've already voted on the election, does it technically have to be called a town election, or can this electronic sign just say, vote Monday, June 24th? I think it's a little confusing. People think they've already voted.
We can try to clarify it, but it is a special town election.
So technically, that's what it is. But will town council allow you to modify it on the
I-
electric sign?
I think we can probably, specify override ballot
That's
question or
pretty
something.
specifically clear. I mean, it tells you that you're going to be voting for the purpose of an override to support the town budget.
That
But-
assumes they see that.
Oh, I understand, but I mean, again, it's the big red thing in the homepage of the Paxton Town. Yeah, I get what you're
That
saying.
assumes they go to the homepage.
Yeah, you're right.
We can try to fiddle with it a little bit and try to make it as clear as possible. Right now, I think 3, if not 4 out of 4 of the messages on the board are pertaining to the election and town meeting.
Any new business, old business? Anyone from the public like to address? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none. Abstentions, none. Thank the public for joining us this evening. We appreciate it. We stand adjourned.